Fiction writers can be grouped in two psychological groups, called the convincers and the supporters. Which one you are is something you can easily figure out by learning about the writing modes of both of these groups. And that is what we'll be doing today. The problem is that oftentimes convincers and supporters relate to whatever description you're giving them. So in this video, we're gonna try and figure out for sure which psychological group you belong to. And for that, we will look at the differences and how these groups decide what sentences and paragraphs to write and how they find structure for their scenes and narratives. One basic rule of thumb, we always validate based on parameters. Validating means giving a green light to whatever you're about to write. You decide what the next sentence or paragraph will be based on certain parameters. And these parameters could be anything. Is this enjoyable? Is this impactful? Is this boring or not boring? Does this adhere to the writing advice that I've read or the systems I've created for myself? Is this telling an important message? The most common parameters are, is this truthful to the characters, to physics, to common sense? Is this an organic progression of the scene? Some writers want to write an entertaining story, so they may invalidate a scene structure because they think it's boring. Others may decide that whatever they just wrote is an expression of their own personality, so it would be disingenuous of them to cut it. Again, you validate based on whatever parameters you pick. That's the beauty of writing. You make up your own standards. Okay, so what is the difference between being a convincer or a supporter? One way to figure out which group you belong to is to take a look at the parameters that you utilize. For convincers, the text needs to feel right based on parameters that are more about public perception. Is this original? Is this sophisticated? Is this going to help me stick out of the crowd? Is this adhering to the advice I learned from that reputable source? As convincers, we really are suckers for writing advice, and we rely on writing advice way too much. And then we think that since I obeyed this writing advice, I did everything right, now I deserve to be successful. The supporters, on the other hand, utilize parameters that are more about acceptability. Will this make audiences care about my story or characters? Will this provide value to audiences? Will this treat their investments right? So it's all about what the audience feels and what they feel about the story and the characters, right? It's all about delivering value to the audience and cultivating their investment. Here it is important that you reflect hard on what you do in the moment. You can even make an experiment. The next time you write, try to figure out which of these intentions is the more natural to your personality, which one is more unconscious and automatic. Are you trying to provide value to an audience? Or are you really just trying to make your story as special an achievement as possible? If it's still blurry to you, then don't worry, because now we're going to discuss the writing modes themselves. Writing modes is all about how the structure of our scenes comes to be. Not the entire story, but the scene itself. So we are talking about writing on a very local level here, because this is where the difference between convincers and supporters becomes most apparent. And we're going to start with the convincer writing mode. The convincers express the cognitive functions of introverted feeling and extroverted thinking. We already learned about introverted feeling in previous videos, but not about extroverted thinking. To explain how extroverted thinking works, we have to have another look at introverted feeling. Introverted feeling is all about emotional investment, but we can also define it as a general how you feel about something. I feel really good about this, or I feel really bad about myself, or about this plan that we're about to execute. And guess what? How you feel about something depends on what you know about it. And this is where extroverted thinking comes in. TE makes you want to know more about something so you can figure out how you should feel about it. Extroverted thinking, TE, is all about being aware of data points and information that is outside of yourself. People's opinions, people's achievements, people's solutions to problems. It's all data points. This is why in the previous video, I said that convincers try to achieve and to earn titles and accomplishments and achievements, because those are evidence that justifies the convincer to feel good about themselves. And it does something else that is very important for this video and for fiction writing itself. Extroverted thinking handles data points and moves them around, connects them, and compares them. Extroverted thinking structures data points. Extroverted thinking gives the convincers the ability to structure information in their minds. We all have a superpower that the supporters just don't have. We can build mental scaffolds and move data points around in them. If you are a convincer, then you are aware of this network of information. You can compartmentalize your scene before you write or while you write into pieces and sections. Writing is more like creating bricks to you. And in your head, you begin to move these bricks around and you rearrange them until you find a version of your text or your scene that your introverted feeling can feel better about, that you can get invested in. So while you are considering your scene, like either before you write it or while you write or while you edit it, your brain is automatically compartmentalizing the text into pieces and is trying to figure out a more ideal structure, a more ideal version of the scene. Your introverted feeling is then invested in this improved version, and then you try to create it by restructuring the text, switching out pieces and rewriting certain pieces, maybe adding certain pieces, all in order to synthesize that structure that you have in your mind. And I'm not talking about polishing prose here. This is just about structure, how the scene progresses, how the story progresses. When to deliver a certain piece of exposition, for instance. If two characters have to fight in the scene, but also make a discovery, what comes first? In video number 10, we're going to find two different versions of the convincer mode, because the convincers can be divided in two quadrants, the cartographers and the strategists. And they both have their own version of this convincer writing mode. Supporters express the cognitive functions of introverted thinking and extroverted feeling. We learned about extroverted feeling in previous videos, and how extroverted feeling is always trying to get people to appreciate and value the writer, get them invested in the writer and the story. Introverted thinking, or TI, is something that we don't really need to understand yet in order to understand the supporter writing mode. There will be a deep dive into introverted thinking in the future, where all your questions will be answered, but for now, to understand supporter writing mode, all we need to know is that supporters don't express extroverted thinking very much, which means they aren't very good at compartmentalizing the text and structuring things in their minds. They can't write except by logically progressing the scene and hoping that the structure that they get works for the story. Of course, they can help themselves to a structure as well, and that will be the topic for the 11th episode in the series. But for now, let's focus on the supporter mode, and here I actually have some visual aids for you. Let's have a brief look at this little graphic that I made. You can see here start marks the start of your scene, and all these pieces up there are exposition, world building, character development, or action pieces, which you now want to make part of your scene. But you don't really know where in the scene, because you don't really have a mental scaffold in your mind. And so you just logically progress the scene one sentence, one paragraph after another. Being in the scene tells you the most about what you need in the scene and what structure the scene needs. You may also start without having prepared any information or any pieces, any structural pieces. In that case, you would just create the information as you write. So this is the supporter mode. If you're a supporter, then if you want to write a scene and you don't prepare a structure, then you go into the scene relatively blind. And we'll discuss what you can do to help yourself in these cases in the 11th video of this playlist. But in general, your supporter brain won't find the structure by itself. If you're a convincer, then your convincer brain will imagine a structure that guides your efforts. And this is convincer mode. You have a mental image of the story that your introverted feeling approves of. Maybe you're about to write it, or maybe you already wrote it and you try to improve it now. In both cases, you imagine the pieces of your story and you arrange them so they fit your parameters the best, so that your introverted feeling can approve. And then when you write or when you edit and rewrite, you already know what goes where, and you let your mental information structure guide your process. It is like having an outline, except your brain does it sort of automatically. And then while you write or before you write, your brain constantly rearranges the pieces of the structure in order to find a more ideal version of the scene. Alright, that's it. This was the writing modes video. The next video is video 10, which is the deep dive into the convincers, how they outline and how they discover their stories, and also the differences between the cartographers and the strategists. And then we will go into video 11, which is the same treatment for the supporters. I hope I'll see you in those two videos.